Hello, everyone, and welcome back. In this episode, we're going to talk about advanced setlist management. I don't know that this is really advanced, but that sounded cool to me, I guess. So we'll go with it. First thing you might ask is, why? The Quad Cortex already has set lists, right? It has something called Setlist, and it does. So you can actually create up to 10 customizable set lists. So the factory presets and the user presets are also set lists, but they are fixed. You don't get to change those. Beyond those two, you can create 10 additional. And then each set list has up to 32 banks. And every bank can hold 8 presets. So you can have 256 presets per set list, which is a lot. But one issue is you need to know where they are. You need to know where a given preset is. It's not easy to jump around between presets randomly, should you need to do that. Given most times you're going to have a fairly standardized set list that you're going to play through. But if you are in the case of where you're a cover band or a wedding band or something similar, where you're taking requests, you may need to jump around. And that's not necessarily easy, at least from a purely foot switch controlled perspective. So let's look at some of those problems that we might have on the current implementation of setlist on the QC. Maybe not problems, but shortcomings. One limitation is you can't move between setlists via the foot switches. You're going to have to go down and pop open the directory. Should you have things arranged, or should you try to organize things across set lists, you don't have an easy way to do that on the fly without hunching down and getting into the QC. You can't name banks. They're just numbered. So if you want to organize things in a certain way, you just have to remember what number it is. You've got to have like an indexing system that number 8 is this genre, or number 27 is this other genre, and that's where I keep my presets for that. So you've got to kind of remember that. You don't get to name things. And then moving between banks can require a lot of stomping. Either you're gonna be able, if you're talking about purely foot switch controlled, you're talking about pressing up or down many, many times, like somebody dropped a box of cockroaches and you're trying to take care of the problem. Or you can do mode changes, so you can double tap or double stomp the 2 lower buttons, the tap tempo and preset down, to change into preset mode, and then you can skip one bank at a time. But then it's like you have to click to switch into that mode, maybe more than once. Click up or down to get to the bank you want. Click A through H to get to the specific preset in that bank, and then click again to confirm that's the preset you want to change to. Then you've got to double stomp again to get out of that mode. And again, perhaps more than one time, depending on how you have your modes organized. That's still quite a few taps, a tap dance that you need to be doing. And then control modes are global versus per song. And this is somewhat of a limitation. Depending on how you're using QC, there may be no working around this even in a MIDI world. If you're using hybrid mode, you kind of just have hybrid mode. But if you are someone who switches between scene or stomp mode, or wants to do the MIDI hybrid where you keep the QC in stomp mode and your MIDI controller in scene mode, or if you have maybe a looper type config where you want to use the MIDI controller to control the looper in a very specific way, and then you can put the QC into scene mode. So you still get scenes, and then you get looper control on your MIDI controller, right? Those sort of variants. Right now, you're either in scene mode or stomp mode for everything. And if you want to change that, you change to a different song and you want to run that song, if you're just purely in a QC context, in stomp mode versus scene mode for the previous song, you have to handle that mode change. It's, whatever you're in is sort of what you're in. And if you change it, you have to come back for the next preset and change it back to scene mode if you want to get out of stomp mode. So we may have a solution to do that a little bit better. So what are the things that we would like to have given those limitations? Ideally, it would be great to be able to navigate to any needed preset without involving the touchscreen, or at least minimizing the actual number of stomps it takes. It still might take 2, 3, 4, but it shouldn't be a tap dance and a shuffle and a mode change and everything we talked about previously. So we want to reduce that. Ideally, it would be nice to have more intuitive organization. We could do things by, a gig that we want to do, or specific gigs. If we play every Friday night or Saturday night somewhere, or at different places, we can organize them that way, which you can do in the QC. But you can't really name those banks. And it's not as intuitive as it could be, that indexing into what set of presets or songs that I want to manage. It would also be nice to be able to manage those control modes per song, whether I want scene, stomp, maybe that looper mode that I talked about, or a MIDI hybrid. It would be nice to just have that handled, to be able to program that in ahead of time and go, for this preset, I want to control it this way, which is something that you can't easily do on the QC. So what does that look like? Well, I think we start with sort of a home base, a home screen, which is going to be our primary launching point. And that home page, think of it sort of like the directory homepage on the QC, where you can scroll and see your set lists. This is going to be a similar thing implemented on the MIDI controller. So we have our launch point to get into set lists. Then we need to define what a set list is. This could represent a gig. It could be a genre. You could have, we're going to get there in a moment, you can have song lists that could maybe also represent a genre within a set list, right? If the set list for a gig is that wedding band gig, then, the gig is the wedding, and then the song lists beneath the set list could represent genres. Or you can just have a set list for 80s, for 90s, for grunge, whatever, at this level. Again, there's some flexibility built in here. So home connects to set lists connect to song lists. So we need to be able to jump from a set list into a list of songs, which are effectively presets. And we need the ability to go back home. We need to navigate, right? There's an element of hierarchy here where we're drilling down to a specific song ultimately, but we need to be able to come back up. We got to have this notion of going back to home. Then we have our song list. This is what actually holds the songs, meaning presets, or points to the presets on the QC. And it connects to a control scheme. So that sort of hybrid, scene, stomp, the looper control mode that we talked about. You get to that from your song list where your presets live. We also need those navigational elements. We need to be able to go back, up one to our set list, but then it would be nice to be able to also go directly to home. Again, in service to minimizing the number of stomps. If you want to go all the way back to the top and drill into a totally different set list, it would probably be easier to go all the way home and then to the set list rather than to your current set list, then back to home, then back down to the new set list. We're going to save an intermediary level of stomp there. So finally, we have our control scheme. And these are song specific. So again, just like the modes, basically a stand-in for the modes on the QC. These would be reusable across songs. So you might have 4 songs that you just want to run in scene mode, and that's fine. And then that 5th song, you need stomp mode. You only need one instance of your scene mode controls that you assign to those songs. And then you need one instance for your stomp or your looper mode controls, and you assign that to the songs where that's appropriate. So these are reusable, the control schemes. And then again, we need our navigational components. We need to go back to song list. And then we also need to be able to jump all the way back to home from that control. So skip all the intermediary levels, go straight back to home. And it's this basic foundation that we're going to create on the MC8 today. So this is a long video. I'm trying to mix up the length, give like some short, quick ones, and then give some longer in-depth tutorials. This is definitely a longer and in-depth tutorial. So I hope you're here for the long haul today, because it's going to be a long one. So in practice, just putting that, here's what it looks like. We've got our home bank. That's going to connect to multiple set list banks. And I call them banks here because on the MC8, again, terminology could be different based on your MIDI controller. We're going to represent each of these with banks on the controller. Banks hold presets on Morningstar controllers. So home banks, setlist banks, song banks, and control banks. And then in practice, what we're going to do is, right, we're on our home page, we click that, we click setlist 1, and we're going to jump into setlist 1. From setlist 1, I click Songlist 1, essentially, so to get to my preset listing for that. And then when I get to song 1, I want to select the control scheme for that. And so I can jump into that. When I'm at this control level, that's when I'm actually playing my song. That song ends. If I want, you probably wouldn't do this on every song. I'd probably just go back to my song list. But with that hierarchy, that navigational hierarchy, we can hop all the way back through to home and start the process over again. And so this basic control scheme is what we're going to set up today. I wanted to start with this presentation to give sort of a primer again, so you have something to refer to or an image in your head of what we're building as we drill down through this on the MC8. And with that, I think let's just get to it.
Okay, so for the actual configuration of this, we're going to take it one step at a time. Before we get into the setlist home, which will be the first thing we configure, if you look over here, you can see that I've set up, essentially, I wiped my MC8 and, well, backed up and then wiped it to sort of a completely clean config as far as the banks. And then I've set up a couple banks here. So these ones at the top are our control banks. And obviously you could have more or less of these depending on what you want to do. We have our setlist home bank. Then we have our set lists. In this case, I just did 8. You could do more, you could do less. But since we have 8 buttons on the MC8, I'm going to make one for each. And then I'm going to go through, filling in one set list, basically, and we can have 8 song lists. We potentially have 16 because every one of these, you can see at setlist home here, if I toggle these 2 buttons, has a second page. So you can actually do 16 of any of these items. So on the home page, I could have 16 set lists, but not as many song lists, maybe in that point, right? Or I could have, within a given set list, I could have 16 song lists. So that's quite a few songs when it's all said and done, or set lists, but we're just going to go with 8 and 8 and not worry about toggling pages. So 8 set lists, we'll set up a set list. We have 8 song lists, and then within the song list, we'll have 8 songs each, although again, you can have 16 there. And then we'll look at the control modes. So we're going to go right in the order that I showed you on the earlier discussion of the architecture of sort of setting this up. So let's get into the home page. And this was really simple because all this does is jump to set lists. We don't need to go back to anything, right? We're at the top of our hierarchy. And the way we do that is for any given preset, so this one's called setlist 1, we will assign the onRelease action. And then for the message type, we're going to come down to this device subsection and pick bank jump. So you can see I already have this one set up. We're going to get this message, and then this is going to give you a list of all the available banks. And since this is setlist 1 up here, we want to jump to setlist 1. And that's really it. So to create my other set lists, setlist 2 through 8, we can simply just copy this whole preset like this. Go to preset B, we can paste that, and then we just need to make a couple changes here. So we're going to change our name, and then obviously we want to bank jump to setlist 2. Go ahead and save that. You'll see that get applied. And then same thing, go to C, go ahead and paste. And I'm not going to do all these, but this you will get through very quickly. Setlist 3, bank jump to setlist 3. Go ahead and save. So one quirk I want to discuss, because I'd like to show you how this works. I'd like to show that bank jump. If I were to test this now, so let's say I go back to setlist 1 and I have it configured to jump to bank 10. And normally well, as you just saw, when I pressed A, or when I, usually when you execute something on the on your Morningstar controller while you're connected to the editor, it will send the MIDI messages so you can see it. If I make a change on my QC, right, in every previous video, that action takes place immediately. For these, when you do these bank jumps or these on-device commands, seemingly because the editor is either using like the same communication channel or it's some internal channel or something, you actually have to disconnect from the editor in order to test this. Before we move on to the next section, I want to show you what it looks like. And I'm not changing anything in the QC at this point. It's only going to be on the MIDI controller itself. But in order to test this, after I've saved it, I'm going to hit disconnect. And now if I press Setlist 1, you'll see that we switch to Setlist 1 on the device. If I try to do that same thing, if I go, spoiler alert, if I go back into the editor and have this connected, and I'm at my Setlist home, if I try and do that, press to go to Setlist 1, nothing happens. The editor updates to the preset that I'm on, right? That moves between A, B, and C. But I do not make that bank jump. So just a word, if you try and do this yourself and you're trying to switch banks and go, why isn't it working? You have to disconnect. It's something I learned, honestly, along the way of doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy paste and set up the rest of these for the home page. We're not going to configure all of them, but just so that the home page at least looks complete. I'll set up the rest of the jumps, and then we'll pick up in the next section to actually configure one of the set lists. You got a sneak peek of that now, but we'll go in depth about how that works. All right, after a brief set of ninja copy pasting, we now have our home page filled in with our 8 set lists. Again, we could set up more via the second page, but as Bill Gates once said, 8 set lists ought to be enough for anybody. And just before, you can see I'm not connected on the editor, so I just wanted to show running through this. So I can click Setlist 3. It's obviously empty at this point. And then I have a back button, which I'm gonna show you how to set up in this section. A double tap to come back to home. So I can hop into Setlist 2, Setlist 5, right, whatever it may be. Setlist 7, and I can always come back home. So from any set list, just like we talked about in the earlier presentation, I have the ability from the home page to jump into a set list, and I have the ability from a set list to jump back home. Obviously, we're going to focus on set list 1. You can see I've got a couple things set up there already. So let's dive into how to set that up. Going back to our slide, we need our set lists to be able to connect to song lists, right? They jump to a song list. We also need the ability to go back home. And so to do that, I've set up 3 commands. I'll explain why I have 3 things and why they're kind of doing the same thing in a moment. But first, as you may have already guessed, the first thing we're going to do for this song list is, give it a name. So this could be song list 1. It could be a gig name. It could be, Joe's Bar and Grill. If you play at Joe's Bar and Grill, every weekend, on Fridays, on Saturdays, whatever, it's up to you, right? The names don't really matter. But within this set list, we've got different song lists. So maybe I'm a cover band, as I've said many times, and I've got my 80s songs, and I want to be able to jump to a list of those songs. So in this case, we're going to call that song list 1. And just like we did on the home screen, I'm configuring my on release to do that device control bank jump. And I'm just picking song list 1 in this case, because maybe that's where my 80s lived. I could, just as easily name this 80s as well. So that achieves our first step of a set list jumping to a song list. But as we talked about before, we need a way to go back. And you've seen me using that. And so on preset A specifically, this isn't tied to the 80s song list. This is more about just muscle memory. And when I think back, I think, left side, forward is right side, left side and bottom, because you can go bottom top for up down, back forward, left right So I just picked the most easily reachable. I don't have to reach over the unit to do this, and the leftmost stomp, which is going to be A. So that's kind of my navigation, one of a few navigation options that I'm going to use to go back. And in this case, I've decided a double tap. You can use whatever actions you want for this. But to go back home, we're doing the same thing. We're doing a bank jump. And you can see the names get filled in. Sometimes you have to hit the set list for it to not give you the generic bank name. But you can see on a double tap, we're going to jump back home. Now, I've added a long double tap, also going back to home. And the reason for that is, if you remember on that initial presentation, I wanted to have a way to go even from a song list or a control scheme to jump back home as well. So I need the ability to go sort of up one or up all the way to home. For muscle memory's sake, a double tap is always going to be up one level from a set list is the set list home. Up one level from a song list is the set list. Up one level from a control scheme, when I'm actually in the song and performing it, is going to be the song list, right? So I can do that. That's double tap. Double tap's always going to go back one. A long double tap is going to be the global gesture in my setlist config to go home, to skip over. I don't want to go up one. I don't want to go up two. I don't want to have to double tap my way back through. Just take me back to home so I can pick a different set list. That's a long double tap, which is essentially double tap and hold. I'll demonstrate it in a moment. And in this case, that's always going to go home. I've put it here on my set list, even though a double tap also takes me to home. Again, just muscle memory. If I always know, or I'm thinking, or I can't remember where I'm at, if I double tap long press, I always go home. I don't have to think about it when I'm in the middle of battle on stage. I'm just going to go there. So I'm programming both options on the set list, even though it doesn't make a ton of sense because a double tap will always take you there. So now that this one is set up, let's take a look at the others, which you can see are going to do the same thing. But since those buttons aren't representative of navigation, all we need to do, much like the home page, is just set up the bank jump. So you can see here I've kind of organized that by genre, but Songlist 2 is going to be grunge, and Songlist 3 is going to be hair metal, and then what would we be without jazz? And that's going to be Songlist 4. And again, I will copy paste these and fill in the last few, and then we can do a quick test. Okay, so I've once again gone through the process of filling out the rest of this particular set list, our set list 1, and now we're going to test it, which means I have to disconnect from the editor because of that quirk. And before I do that, I'm going to just jump back to setlist home, and we'll test the whole process. So let's test this out. I've gone back to home. I want to go to maybe setlist 1 here. Great, that's the first one we programmed. And then from this to go back home, I want to double tap. That's great. Setlist 2. I can also double tap to get back. I can also show if I double tap and hold and let go, I also go home. So they are two different gestures. That's double tap, quickly release, and then double tap, hold, let go, and you can see it switch back there. So we know that both of those navigational tools, up one and go to home, are both working. In this case, go back to home is also up one, but everything looks good at this point. So now we're ready to start programming in our song list, and we'll do that next. Okay, so moving forward into our song list, and the responsibility of this bank is to actually start configuring the QC to do something and take us to our control mode. And then obviously those same requirements of back one and back to home. So let's start with configuring the QC. Ultimately, this amounts to just a preset change message. And if you remember from a prior video, I'm going to put it up on screen. I kind of have my preset cheat sheet or the little guide that will tell you all the CC and PC messages you need to pick any given preset in any set list, in any bank on the QC. I'm keeping this one really simple, and we're just going to use the factory presets like we have been. And so in this case, song 1 is just going to be preset 1A from the factory set list. And as you can see here, I'm on preset 2A on the QC. But if we bring up the preset sort of cheat sheet and we look at this, for CC32, it's going to be zeros across the board. But for CC32, we send CC value 0. For CC0, we also send value 0. And then for our program change, we're going to send a value of 0 as well. So not hard to remember that one. It's zeros across the board. And so we've put those in, and these will all trigger off release. So when I press song 1, just not a long press on anything, I just press it, the QC changes to preset 1A in the factory presets. So great, we've selected our song, essentially, meaning our preset for that song. So let's look at our next responsibility. We want to be able to go into control mode. And the way I'm doing that is for a given song, I'm setting up a long press, not the long double tap, just a single long press to take us into control mode. And in this case, for this scene, that amounts to a bank jump, and I'm going to leverage the scene control scheme for this preset. There are two distinct actions here, and you could combine this for sure. You could combine so that you automatically do the bank jump. I may demo that later on as like an extras section for changes you might make. But for the sake of this now, it's a press to select, and this bank jump isn't going to work. It would be a long hold jump to control mode for that song. That may be not everyone will use this for control as well. Maybe you just want this to manage your set list, and then you're going to go to the QC, in which case you're done. As far as that, you don't need to add the scene control change. But in my methodology, I like having the ability to control those actions. Maybe I don't want to get in. Maybe we're deciding what song to play, and I'm just going to wait. I'm going to queue up for the next song. So I've already programmed song 2, so I go to 1B here, and then they go, no, we're going back to the other song. And instead of having to jump back I can just press this and then go into control mode once we're set. A little more flexibility. It's an extra click in a way, but I like the flexibility that brings. So here, that's what we have set up to get into scene control. Yeah, I had that wrong. That should be a long press. I think I was demoing the having it automatically jump to scene control. So let's save it this way. My mistake. And so we've handled 2 of our responsibilities, which is update the preset on the QC and have a method to jump to our control mode. Done. Now we need to do our navigation tools. We need to do our up 1, which is our double tap on A. And that's going to take us back to setlist 1 because we know that we're getting to this from setlist 1. So going up 1 in our navigation tree is setlist 1. And then we do same as we have. We do our long double tap to go back to setlist home. So let's see this in action. I'm going to save it one more time just in case. I'm going to disconnect from the editor and we'll do a quick test of this functionality. Okay. First, let's just test going home, and I'll walk all the way back through to this point. So long double tap, let go, setlist home, just like we want. Let's pretend that we're on a different preset in the QC. One too many taps there. So I want to go to setlist 1. I want to go into my 80s set list, everything working as planned. and then I want to select song 1. Select it, our QC changes to that preset, and now I'm ready to play. So I want to go into control mode, which is going to be a long press. And when I let go, I go into scene control mode. So scene A, scene B, and everything else. If you'll notice on the QC, I also popped gig mode. That's a feature that you can add on your control mode bank, which we'll get into in a moment. And now I have scene control. So anything I press on here, you can see that we're moving through the scenes on our QC. I'm going to get into the scene control mode in a moment, but spoiler alert, if I double tap this, I want to have that same navigation. A is always, right? Muscle memory, double tap to go back. I want to go back to my song list. I double tap. And if I pick song 2, we're going to go there. Song 3, song 4. I can go from control mode all the way back home, double tap and hold. So I can go all the way from within my preset. I don't have everything set up to toggle the gig view modes and stuff for that right now, but I can jump all the way from control back. So our song list looks good. And we're going to get into setting up that control scheme in the next section. All right, the control schemes. I'm just going to set up this one. I've got a couple other created, but honestly, those are purely for sample, sample explanation. We're not going to configure those because if you get this for one, you're going to get it for the others. I will talk about some nuance of this, how you can use scene control and stomp control, and that stomp control can be used to control hybrid mode. If you have hybrid mode on your QC, that would be the one you would select. Or that would be how you should configure your control scheme if you want to be able to operate hybrid mode via your MIDI controller to the QC. Hopefully that makes sense. Since the stomp MIDI messages simulate the physical switch press on the QC, the scene messages we're about to configure are literal specific dedicated switch scenes. Do not press a stomp, just go to the scene. The stomp emulation MIDI commands are literally just like hitting the physical stomp. So if you're in hybrid mode and the top 4 switches are stomps and the bottom 4 are scenes, then if you match those, the top 4 items on your MIDI controller will be stomps and the bottom ones will be scenes. Obviously, the way they're labeled, right? The Morningstar starts with ABC on the bottom and the QC starts with ABC on the top. But you can program these any way you want. E can be A as far as the message it sends. So you can line these up, and A can be E. It's not a big deal to change those. I think of them more as in positions than the actual labels. But you do it however you want. It doesn't really matter. If you're doing pure MIDI control, I tend to line up the labels with the scenes. But if you're using this in that stomp mode for hybrid control, I would align it with the way things work on the QC. Just kind of a tangent there, but important to note. In this case, we're setting up scene control. And this is going to work pretty much just like you expect. For our scene A here, we are sending our CC number 43, which is that Quad Cortex scene change from the MIDI dictionary. We've covered that before, CC value 0. It's for each scene, you're essentially just ramping up this CC value. We'll see that in a moment. And so that part is handled. But much like the rest of our control scheme, we need to have our back button and we need to have our go to home button. There's no drama here on go to home. It's exactly the same thing we set up everywhere else. Long double tap, go to bank 9. The interesting thing about going back here, going back 1 to our song list, is that since the control banks can be reused across a song from anywhere, we don't know what bank to go back to. In a song list, we know that our 80s song list is associated with our sort of 80s set list, maybe, or whatever. And we can hard code that in. We can just say, yeah, go back to this set list from this song because that's where this song belongs. We can't do that with the control scheme. And luckily, Morningstar has us covered here because you have this option to, instead of saying specifically jump to an explicit number. So if I pick, go to last used bank, no, we get to pick a specific bank number. We have the option to say, go to the last used bank and page. So if we are using that paging, right, like on here, it will remember the page as well. So if we jump to a song from page 2, it will go back not only to the last used bank, but page 2. If it's a song on page 1, it will go back to the last bank and page 1. So that's a nice addition where no matter where we use our scene control from, going back, our double tap on A is always going to take us to the right place. Since this is the mode or the bank that we're using to actually control our performance, there's a couple of nice quality of life things we can add to this. Toggling gig view is one. You kind of saw that in the testing. I've removed that here, and we can go to our C button, let's just say. Of course, press and release of C is going to take us to scene C on the QC, which I can do that here. And you'll see that our little scene indicator there changed to C. But I've added a double tap command for that. And what that is going to do is going to toggle gig view. So on scene C, I can put it on or off depending on what mode I want to be in. Much easier than reaching down and trying to swipe on the screen. If there's an issue and you need to quickly get out of gig view, you can do it right from your MIDI controller. Nice quality of life thing there. Another thing we like to use a lot is our tuner. So I've set up on D, and you'll see we switch to scene D, of course. That's been configured. But then I've set it up where I can have a momentary tuner. So on long press, if I press and hold D, it will pop the tuner. And then on the release of that, I'm just going to send the same message. The QC, unfortunately, doesn't have explicit on-off toggles, where they split the value range, where like 0 to 63 is off and 64 to 127 is on, or just any specific values for that. They're all toggles. I am hoping that changes in the future, but for the time being, we can make it work with the Morningstar controller because we can address the different actions. So our long press is one action, and you can see the tuner came up. And for as long as I hold this, it will stay up. And when I let go, the long press release action is triggered, and it just toggles it back off. So we've got in our performance mode, or our control mode, we've got the ability to pop our tuner momentarily. As soon as we're happy with that, we can let go. We've got the ability to toggle our gig mode. And then on A, not only do we have scene A, and you'll notice that toggling, double tapping C does not change the scene we're in. Only pressing C changes. And same thing for A, if I navigate there, or press and hold on the tuner is not changing our scene. That's important. I think people worry about that once I press it, it would change the scene to that as well. Those are essentially just secondary additional functions. But then on A, I've still got my navigation back, which isn't going to work because I'm connected to the editor, but that would take me back to my set list. And we'll run a full test now. We've got everything programmed in, and then we'll get into a couple of little extras as far as how you might want to modify or tweak this. So let's do that test. Okay, here we are, disconnected from our MIDI editor so that we can do bank jumps. And we're back at our home screen. We're going to choose Setlist 1. That's great. I want to choose Songlist 1 from that, which is our 80s song list that we just programmed. And then I want to jump to song 2. And then I want to jump into control mode for song 2. So I long press, and when I release, I'm in my scene mode. I want to pop up gig view. It's there. I can switch to scene A, scene B, scene C. All right, all of that works. I can go, double tap, change that. I can press and hold for my tuner. When I let go, I'm still back in gig view. And then I can go back to the set list with a double tap, and you'll see that I do go back to set list 1, which was my last set list and the page that I was on. I can choose song 2, even with gig view up. You can see that the QC is changing songs. And then I can jump into control mode for that song with a long press. And once again, I can pop my tuner, toggle gig view, or I can go back to my song list from control mode. I can go back to my set list from my song list, and I can go back to home from my set list. So everything seems to be working. And then obviously from any point in there, so even from my song list, I can long double tap and go home as well, or from control mode. I guess let's just show that. So in the control mode, if I long double tap from here, I go all the way back to home. So everything looks good there. I'm going to take a little section here at the end to cover a couple of tweaks or changes you might want to make to this. And then we're going to close out this video. We're back, and this is a little extras section. One of the first things you might want to tweak on this, but again, without the ability to explicitly toggle things on or off, you got to be careful with some of these. But the first thing might be popping up gig view when you enter a control scheme. So at the point where we have selected our song list, and I, press and hold song 1 to get into my scene control, maybe I want gig view to pop up. Now, if gig view is already up, this is going to turn it off. The good thing is within our control scheme, we have the ability to fix that. That's why this is on a button. So if we had an explicit on and only on, then it wouldn't matter. And if we had an explicit off, we could do other creative things. But for the sake of just showing how that might work, what we can do is we can apply a MIDI command on the bank. So if we switch over here at the top and say edit bank, essentially when we enter this bank, these messages will get fired off. So, I guess we get to choose on enter and on exit. If we choose on enter bank, we can send a CC. And we're going to use the MIDI dictionary for this. And pick our QC here. And I want to do open close gig view. We'll take that value. So that's CC46. The value doesn't matter. This can be 0, 127. It's going to toggle that on or off, depending on the state that it's in. We save those bank settings. And now if I disconnect, so I've selected song A, and now I'm going to switch into control mode. When I let go, so I'm long pressed, when I let go, it's going to toggle the MC8 into the scene control scheme. And because I'm entering that bank, it's also going to send the gig view message. So I'm going to let go, and we toggle into our control and immediately pop gig view. If we want, on the double tap, let's do that now. To go back, you can see I went back to my song list. Let's reconnect. Go back to our bank editing on scene control, and we can do on exit bank. Actually, let's do this. You can just copy, since it's basically the same thing, and just change the event to on exit bank. Sending the same message, because that's going to toggle it. Save our bank settings. Let's go to song list 1 here, and we will disconnect. And and we should get out of gig view. Get out of gig view mode there. So assuming we're starting not in gig view, if I long press and hold, we're going to go into our give view mode and our control mode. And if I double tap out, we're going to go back to our song list and get out of gig mode. So let's say I want song 3. We go in. If I go all the way back home, long press, double tap, we also get out of gig view and I'm back home. I can drill back in, go to song 2, and we can have gig view pop up. Again, if I get into trouble, I can always toggle it, right? Because if I get out of it now and I go back, it's going to toggle gig view back on. And I then have to re-enter this mode where it's going to turn it off and turn it back on. So that's where you can get in trouble. I desperately want explicit on-off messages. But if you're careful about how you do this and you're in the right states, then you can have that pop up when you enter your actual performance mode, which is going to be your, the control mode, which is this. You'll always have gig view up and available. Still the ability to toggle it, but it would always do the right thing. And when you left that, you could get out of gig mode. So that's sort of hack or tweak number 1. Hack or tweak number 2 would be, I don't want to have to select the song and then long press to go into control mode. I just want to hit the song and go immediately to control mode. And to do that, we'll come into our song list, and you kind of saw this earlier, where instead of having this bank jump on a long press, I can add it to a release. And so what will happen now is when I hit this once, it will change the preset on the QC, and then it will automatically bank jump to scene control. When it bank jumps to scene control, it's going to trigger our gig view toggle as well. And we're going to be ready to play, good to go right away. So let's save this. I'm going to have to disconnect again to test it. But let's say I'm on song 2 or whatever, song 3. I didn't make the change on those. So those are still click and long press to go to control mode and double tap to go back. But on A, it should just change the preset and pop me right into control mode with gig view up. So single press, you can see the preset changed. It popped gig mode, and I'm in my scene control mode with my, momentary tuner and my ability to toggle that. Then I can come back again, single press, takes me right in. So that's a tweak. If you don't want to have those as 2 separate actions, you can bind it all to the single press and release and have it jump right to the control mode that you select. And again, if I decide I want, stomp control for this, I would just change that here. So set preset and then send the control mode. Again, there's not going to be anything in that bank. But if I leave and I go to this, you'll see, since that bank's not configured, it didn't pop gig view. And these are just some random stuff I was playing with apparently in this control mode. So, but it's just that easy to change or assign your desired control mode for that. So let's put this back to scene control and save that. Then we're good to go. So another tweak you might want to do is to just have preset control up or down. I'm not going to cover that in this video. I'm going to do a dedicated video to show how to do that because it gets involved in counters and it can be kind of goofy and it's maybe not ideal. It would also be nice potentially to just do like up one bank or down one bank or something on the Morningstar. And maybe I'm missing something obvious, but I don't have a great way to do that just yet. if I figure that out, maybe I'll do an addendum to this video or, a part 2 at some later point. But until then, you don't need to have this many levels. If you wanted to go right from a set list, essentially having the set list itself contain the songs, you could totally do that as well. You can skip this intermediary categorization of things and just from Setlist home. So instead of jumping to a set list, maybe you have a very simple gig, like maybe you got a complex, I'm in a wedding band gig and I want my set list to have many things at my fingertips. Or you just have your Joe's Bar and Grill and I know the songs, I know the whatever 8, 10 songs that we're going to play at Joe's. Just change this to jump right to the song list. It's, you don't need to have this full level of complexity. So if you change that and save it, you're going to skip the intermediary set list. You're going to go right to the song list. You can set the back button action for that song list to go back to home, or you can just double tap and hold. It's already there, right? And that will get you back. So you can make this sort of as simple or complex as you want. I just wanted to give you a basic framework and show you all the ways to set that up. Hopefully I did that, and hopefully you find this useful. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.